screen if I can. Can the host please enable screen sharing?
And should the host also be recording?
I just turned on recording.
Great, thank you. Okay.
I think we did it. I don't know.
I am viewing your screen, Ron.
Yeah, well, I shared my screen. Maybe you got to share yours.
Yeah, I need you to allow me to share my screen because it says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, I did. I did.
Yeah.
No, I did that. Where would that? Would that be under security where I have to take that off? Allow participant. Okay.
I'm not sure.
No,
Jay?
I got. Yeah.
Oh,
wait.
okay. So
Somebody
you'll have
share
to
screen.
exit out of your, yeah, you'll have to exit out of your screen.
I just went into settings, meeting settings, and enable share screen. I'm not sure if that will help you, Carmen.
It will. I need Ron to close his screen share.
I'm trying to find out.
There should be something at the top, Ron, that says stop sharing screen.
All right, just a second here. Can't find it. Stop.
Yeah, stop sharing.
No, it says stop recording meeting. I don't see any stop share. Let's see. I'm kind of in a. Oh, I got it. There we go.
Cool. Thanks everybody for sticking with us. Okay.
Yeah, Mark, when you changed it at the same time, you turned it on, I turned it off at the same time.
Okay.
Here we go.
Good deal.
All right. So Junipers. Today's the 22nd, right? I think I have my time seems to have no meaning anymore. So like I said, we're going to talk about junipers today. And first, why do we love junipers? Well, they're a really interesting tree. You can do, I've got somebody who's not muted. Could y'all check and make sure that you're muted? Because I'm getting some background noise. Okay, cool, thanks so much. Why do we love junipers? They're a really versatile tree. You can do a whole lot with them. As you can see on the right here, there's a collected juniper with some really interesting deadwood. This is a scale juniper. We're going to talk about the two different kinds of junipers. And on the right, we've got a juniper forest. So you can do a lot of different things with these. You can do single tree forests, all kinds of stuff. The bark is a beautiful red color that contrasts really nicely with the green. You can make really lovely defined foliage pads, and the deadwood is a really cool feature, especially because of how junipers grow. They tend to be very striated or bark and twisting. There's some real interest there. And they can be super big. This is actually down at John's place in Tennessee.
Carmen, it sounds like you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Is that a little better?
Much better.
Okay, great. This is down at Bjorn's place in Tennessee. This is a collected, I think it's a Sierra juniper. And there are so many wonderful junipers here in the United States that be collected. They had nested.
Breaking up again.
I'm wondering if my connection's not super good. Hold on, I'm gonna plug in my headphones and see if that helps. But for the record, I'm about 5 feet tall, so that juniper is big. This was 2 years ago, and I think since then they've styled the tree. If you check out his Facebook, how things have changed. Okay. Again, you can see this really interesting twisty deadwood, and that's all natural. So they come with deadwood that has been aged, that's an interesting shape that we can then utilize really well into a design. So there's two kinds of junipers, scale juniper and needle juniper. Scale juniper is, I think, probably what most people are more familiar with and what they have in their collections. This covers Shimpaku, Western juniper, Sierra, Rocky Mountain, creeping, procumbens, Itoagawa, Kishu, all the really common ones that form nice fluffy clouds of their foliage. The needle juniper, on the other hand, is spiky, and I don't particularly like working with it because I don't care for being poked in the hand 100 times. But you can get some really, really well-defined paths, whereas the scale juniper is a little bit more light and fluffy. The needle juniper is more dense. It really has a presence. So needle juniper, common juniper, cryptomeria is not a juniper, but the training is exactly the same. So before you do anything with your juniper, particularly with trimming, you need to know what you have. So here's the scale juniper again. This is the foliage on the left. You can see the individual needles. On the right is, you can see the foliage masses. It's a little bit looser. It looks very soft, nice bright green. A needle juniper, you can see on the left, you've got the close-up of the foliage, shorter, spikier, and then on the right, the really tight, dense foliage pads that are nicely domed. It takes a bit of time to get them to that point, but it's a really interesting look. So there are 5 routine tasks for juniper maintenance that are, the tasks themselves are similar between scale and needle juniper, but trimming is completely different. So these are generally done about 2 times per year. There are some you can, only do once. There's others that you definitely do twice. And sometimes with certain species or the stage of development of your juniper, you'll be doing these 3 or 4 times. So the first, it's a super easy thing to do. I do this with the collection usually in the spring. I'm doing it again right now, and I'll likely do it again in the fall before we put things away for the winter. So removing all the old yellowing shoots and cleaning the undersides of the foliage pad. So what you want to do with this, oh, I have other slides explaining it. Second, removing all the berries. Third, cleaning and protecting deadwood. Fourth, removing flaky bark if you want to. And 5, trimming, and this is where the 2 junipers really, really differ. Their methods of training are completely different. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that. So foliage cleanup, when you look at your juniper, this is a scale juniper, probably Shimpaku. You will often see in the spring or summer a lot of yellowing on the inner parts of the branches. Sometimes things are falling off. A lot of times I get questions, people are asking, what's wrong with my tree? Is my tree sick? Is this a fungus? What am I doing wrong? This is totally normal. Just like how pines will shed their needles in the fall, junipers tend to do this all the time. As long as it's warm and the juniper has water and fertilizer, it's gonna grow. So it's just gonna be kind of a routine task you do, going through and removing all of this stuff. Do
you recommend plucking versus cutting? Or
some people say,
okay,
we'll have a whole conversation, yes.
Okay.
So for the dead stuff, for the yellow stuff, you can go through with your hands and just, that'll come right off. If you get something, a dead tip, use your scissors, of course. We'll talk about trimming in a bit. And then also with your foliage pads, anything that's kind of growing down or hanging, pull that off so you have that really clean, flat edge on the bottom and your foliage pad nicely on top. Then if your tree has berries, go ahead and remove them. The tree uses, like with the azaleas we talked about last month, the tree uses energy and nutrients to form this seed and this fruit that could otherwise be used for growth. And since we're trying to grow our trees and develop our trees, we want that growth rather than the fruit. So with the fruit, then you can learn how to make gin. I'm just kidding. I don't actually know how to make gin, but it would be fun to learn. You probably won't have enough berries to do this unless you have a lot of junipers. Google will help you. All right, cleaning and protecting deadwood. And let me see, I think I have a photo on the next page that we can talk a little bit more about this. So this is something that's really good for summer work. In the springtime, the cambium of a juniper, since all the sap is flowing, it can be very sensitive. So you don't really want to mess with the trunk and the deadwood, live wood veins early in the year. So summertime is a really good time to do this. You can do it again in the fall or when you have time. Sometimes once is enough. So sometimes with a juniper, this will show through on the next slide, where the live vein is, sometimes the live vein recedes over time. And so there's more deadwood to be exposed. If you think this is something that's happening, you can go in with a chisel. I'm trying to think what other tools we use. Oh, the gin scraper tools. I should have included pictures. There's some really interesting tools that you can use to remove that bark and expose the deadwood. And you just work very, very slowly until you hit live wood. And you'll see on the next slide where that difference is and when to stop. So you can extend your deadwood where it's necessary or where you want to. Clean the deadwood, you can use a toothbrush, or when you're using a brush, the metal brushes tend to leave scratches in some of the deadwood. So I would go for something softer like a toothbrush or some kind of harder needle brush, nylon, or a power sprayer. And this sounds counterintuitive, like don't use metal brushes, but sure, use this power sprayer. But what this is it's this little tool. It's about this big. It's a mini power sprayer, and it's actually used for dry cleaning, for stain removal of hard to get out stains. So you can fill this thing with water, do wear your PPE, put on some goggles and your ear protection, your hearing protection, because it is loud. And you can adjust the pressure to clean off algae on your deadwood. Do be careful not to go too hard with the pressure, as you can make holes or lines, or you can mess up your deadwood. You can damage it. So keep it to a medium spray. I've used this successfully on our junipers. This is the same tool actually you can use on azaleas when brushing your bark. If you don't want to hand brush everything, you can hit it with a power sprayer. So if you have azaleas and juniper, this is a great tool to invest in. Once you have your deadwood clean, you can use lime sulfur on the deadwood to give it that white color. You can do a dilution. You can always use straight lime sulfur. It stinks. It will make you stink. And if you use straight lime sulfur, it will be very, very white. So oftentimes we'll do a solution of 50-50, something like that, so that it is white, but it's not white. Also, I learned a trick from Cyril. I think he's on the call. Shout out to Cyril. To use bleach. I'm trying to remember the dilution. I think it's 1 to 10. And you can use this on your deadwood as well, and it'll give you a little bit more of a, this will give you a little bit softer of a lightening of your deadwood.
Yeah, I'll just pipe in here that I've been using 1 to 3.
1 to 3, thank you so much. And then wood hardener as needed. If you have areas that are prone to moisture right up along the soil surface, if there's too much moss on your tree and you're concerned about, any wood getting a little bit funky, go ahead and add some wood hardener as needed. or on your deadwood as well to preserve it. All right, removing flaky bark. So the bark on a juniper underneath all of the aged bark is a nice red color. It's really cool when you do expose it. It contrasts really nicely with the deadwood and with the foliage. This can also help protect against borers if borers are a big problem. I know out west they are. So this is a regular 2-time-a-year thing that you do. I haven't done it on all of the junipers at the collection here at Mathi. This year in particular, because we are lacking volunteers and time, but also because you can leave it on if you like the look of it, especially on needle juniper. It has a really nice silver. So it's really personal preference at this point, at least here in Michigan. So what I want to show, let me see if I can. Hold on, I'm trying to get my, okay. Can you guys see my cursor? Can you see my mouse?
Yeah, I
If
can
move
see it.
Okay, cool. I will use that. So this is what I was talking about with exposing deadwood. So this flaky bark used to come up all the way to here. There was a bit of dieback on the live vein, and so the flaky bark was removed. And then when you're doing this, you'll also feel the difference in the wood a bit. This will be a little bit harder. And so this was excavated a little bit, and right here, it's very hard to see, much easier to see in person. You go a little bit deeper until you can see where the live wood is. So if you continue to dig here, it's just going to be brown. Once you scrape a little bit away here, you can see where the live vein is. So then once all of that bark is removed, you've got your live vein, and this is the piece here that was added. And so it's going to be a little bit more red. It's not quite as aged, but over time it will fade to this same white. Okay, we're going to talk about trimming.
Carmen, there was a question about
Yeah, go
removing
ahead.
someone had a question about how do you remove the bark?
How do you remove the bark? Great question. Oh, I see it now. I'm trying to remember. Oh, brushes. So you get yourself a little metal brush or a nylon brush, and you can go ahead and scrape it. You can also use tweezers and peel it back, or the little scraping tool that you might use to expose this deadwood here. You can use that very gently on this. I've also seen some sandpaper used, especially on this new deadwood, to really smooth it out, because sometimes there can be a little bit of, stuff left over from the bark. Really, really, really fine grit sandpaper. Oh, yes, that's a great question, Erin. Erin asked, is there any advice to prevent lime sulfur from splashing? Yes. So this is a really great trick. Wet all of your deadwood first with water. And then use a very soft paintbrush, dip in your lime sulfur, and then very carefully go through and around on your deadwood, right up against the live vein. The water will help carry that lime sulfur right up to that live vein without actually touching it with your brush. So it'll really smoothly get full coverage. As far as splashing on yourself or your tree, you're just going to have to be extra careful. Was that helpful?
A little. And you use a paintbrush to apply?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any particular bristle? Because I've got some bristles that I've put in lime sulfur and they've just gotten destroyed.
Yeah.
They always seem to get hard.
Yeah. I like the soft bristle ones. I think the ones that I've had the most luck with are natural fiber rather than like a plastic bristle.
And you're just talking about paintbrushes you buy from Lowe's?
Like artist paintbrushes, usually the smaller ones that you might apply like for acrylics or watercolors. If you have a big enough spot to use a paintbrush from Lowe's, you could use that as well. Okay. Trimming. Do not pinch the foliage of a scaled juniper. Don't, 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 don't,
Boo.
don't. It's not good for your tree. So the trimming of a scaled juniper, junipers in general, this is a scaled juniper and needle juniper, they need that shoot extension to develop energy, to maintain momentum in growing. Deciduous trees are different. They kind of create more of that energy in their root zone, which is why you can defoliate, cut off big branches, and you just get whoosh, flushes of new growth. With a juniper, if you remove all of your growing tips continuously, you're going to kill your tree. And it's tricky because because pinching has become ingrained in everybody. This is what you do. It's a fun little nitpicky thing to do, to just kind of pick and pick and pick, but it can be really damaging. So instead, you can remove the extending shoots that grow beyond your foliage pad with scissors. So here on the right is what you're ultimately going for. You're going for a dense foliage pad with a very even amount of energy, where you may not have to trim anything. And if your foliage pad looks like this, you don't have to do any trimming. On the left over here, you can see where this extension is growing outside of the pad. There's probably a little bit right here too. And so take your scissors and cut back in, maybe here and here, kind of into the foliage pad to hide the cut, and it will then refill out.
So, hey, Carmen, I
Yes.
was the one that may have booed a little bit.
That's okay.
I think I agree. That was supposed to be funny. I'm sorry.
No, it was funny.
I was told a long time ago that early spring, if you went and pinched a juniper completely, it would end up making a very compact juniper, and that worked for a long time. My junipers are getting a little bit weak, and I'm wondering if you can pinch really early spring and then allow shoots to grow and then cut back, because now I pinch everything all the time, and that's probably an issue.
Yeah, I would not pinch all the time. Do you have a Shimpaku?
Yes.
Okay, how far back are you pinching?
Not that far. I just try to keep shape.
Okay. I would, especially if your tree's weakening, I would not recommend full pinching, because over time it does, cause your tree to weaken. If you can wait, so this can be done multiple times a year. So in the spring, if you see your tree starting to grow, you can definitely cut back into the foliage pad then. I think I did it a little bit back in May. I'm going through all the junipers now and doing a trim and a wire. And then again, in the fall, probably I'll go and check before they go into cold storage. But if you have young developing trees, if you have a really vigorous grower, sometimes Rocky Mountain juniper in particular will need this 3 or 4 times a year. Okay, gathering thoughts.
Carmen?
Yes.
Yeah, if you continually pinch, it might not show it this year, but if you pinch and pinch and pinch, your tree over a years is going to decline. They have to extend to build the energy in the root system to keep the tree vibrant and growing. Correct?
Absolutely. Yep, you're right on, Tom. Go ahead.
The other thing about pinching is the tips turn brown.
Yeah, that is the other thing. So, and I guess Aaron too, if you're pinching, are you pinching all of the growing tips?
I am. Colleen Muth
Okay.
actually told me to do that first thing in the spring. Like I said, for a long time, my trees got very, very dense very quickly. So,
Yeah. I know that
and
you
at the same time, eventually you've got to come and cut that foliage back or the tree gets out of control,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I was having a lot of trouble with junipers. It was like, okay, well, if you can't actually pinch the foliage, then how the heck do you keep it compact? And I'm still learning by experience for that. Like, I know theoretically how it works, but so what happens in the spring if you, so, okay. Sometimes in the spring, instead of, if the shoot is extending, okay, I'm not even gonna go there, never mind. Let's not pinch our junipers if we can help it. Oh geez, what were we talking about?
That just means I'm going to ask you privately later what you were about to say.
What I was gonna say is that sometimes if it's a small tree, if it's a shimpaku, and you know the shoot is extending, sometimes you can go in and just remove the center of that shoot, but you're not pinching every single tip. I have seen junipers completely pinch, and then oftentimes they'll shoot up a bunch of juvenile foliage, and then that actually puts you a lot farther behind because that juvenile foliage will take a couple years to grow back into mature foliage, and then you'll have a lot of longer branches that aren't particularly useful. So that's also the risk of pinching, is getting juvenile foliage. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with that, scale juniper, when the mature foliage looks like this, the juvenile foliage looks like needle juniper foliage, but after 2 or 3 years, it will mature and become this scaly needle. But to Aaron's other point about, so what happens when these branches get too long? Eventually you do have to cut back. So the trick, if it is a trick, is you try to keep, you continue to do this trimming, and eventually when those branches get long, ideally you will have mature shoots further in that you can cut back to. And this will require a cut back, and then oftentimes a restyling, of getting all your tips back laid out into the pads. So that can happen every, I don't know, it depends how fast your tree is growing.
So that might be where my major heartache comes with junipers, because that means you're restyling them almost constantly and you can't keep a tight pad forever. You're going to lose that tight pad every few years.
Yes and no. I mean, you're not completely restyling, you're just kind of rewiring and relaying out. But yeah, it is a lot of work, for sure. That detail wiring can be picky. I am for hire. No, I'm just kidding.
Carmen?
Yes.
In the spring, don't you leave the junipers alone until the new growth hardens off? That way it gets its energy, builds the roots. When they harden off, in this time when it starts getting warm after spring, almost early summer, then you cut back the extensions. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. When I was talking about very early spring, it was just a couple super long extensions that were sticking out and bugging me.
Okay.
Generally, if you do have a Rocky Mountain though, sometimes they will have kind of a full fledge in the spring. But if you're not showing it, or you don't need to, if they're not too long, if they're healthy, but they're not 4 or 5 inches long, you can let those go until June, July, and then cut back. But yeah, generally you want to wait till they're hardened off.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. There's a comment in the chat. Junipers are hedge trimmed in landscapes around the world. That's correct. They will often have juvenile foliage. They're going for a completely different thing than what we're doing with bonsai. So, okay, good grief, there we go. Trimming needle juniper. So this is a lot different than scale juniper. So needle junipers grow super long, super strong shoots from every tip. So what you want to do is, after they flush out and harden off, cut all of the shoots back to a small stub. This is how you get those really tight domed foliage pads. So what you can see here in the picture, that's about how long you want the shoots to grow. You want them to harden off some, not totally. And so this is usually done June and July, and then again in the fall after they flush a second time. This can be really picky if you have a super ramified tree. You might need tweezers and scissors to kind of go in there and, you know, move things around and shift things, clear stuff out, and then trim everything super short. Pinching is also not recommended for needle junipers for two reasons. First of all, the timing, I should have reversed those. First of all, the timing is off because when the shoots are soft enough to pinch, it is too early in the season and the juniper has not reaped the rewards of sending out its shoots and getting that energy. Secondly, you can get super irregular shoot lengths. By pinching, if you just pinch, you can't really control how much you're taking off. With a scissor, you can go in and very clearly make everything a 1/16 of an inch, an 1/8 of an inch, a 1/4 of an inch, whatever you're going for. Oftentimes it is as small as a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch that is left. Everything else is just removed. This is also what you do with cryptomeria. Again, not a juniper, but same technique. Anybody have questions about needle juniper trimming? Cool. All right. So to recap, 5 major juniper tasks, often done multiple times per growing season. Remove old yellowing shoots, clean the undersides of your foliage pads. And again, actually after you wire, so you'll do some trimming, you'll do some wiring. Once you have everything wired, as you're wiring, you'll often see stuff that you can't quite get, you know, to be correct in the foliage pad, still kind of hanging down. And so you can kind of pinch that off. Yes, I used the word pinch, but that usually you can pull right off as you're wiring. Remove your berries, clean, protect deadwood, remove your flaky bark, and then trimming. Again, scale and needle juniper, super different. We'll talk a little bit about some other juniper stuff. Any questions about the 5 tasks before I move on? Okay. So repotting juniper, you still want to do this within the repotting season, which here is late March, April, very early May if you have to. Junipers prefer it to be a little bit warmer, a little bit more humid when they're being repotted. So if you kind of push these to the end of your repot list for the year and do them lastly in April or very early May, you'll have a good result. If you're doing something in March when it's still pretty cold, I would recommend, I mean, first you probably wouldn't do this unless you have a greenhouse, but definitely keep it super well protected if you're going to do that. If you wait till the second half of April, the first week of May, you'll be in good shape.
Carmen?
Yes.
It's extremely warm and humid right now. Is July a good time, or should that be done in the spring?
I still would do it in the spring because right now they're in the middle of their growth cycle, and I think it would just be unnecessary stress, especially because of they like the heat, they like the humidity, but again, it's just more stressful for the tree. So I would just continue to do it in the spring before they start really growing. That way they can have more root and be ready to support all of that foliage.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So like we talked about a little bit, junipers develop most of their energy from their shoots, unlike deciduous trees, which get a lot of their energy from their root zone. So you want to be a little bit more careful with the roots on junipers, maybe leave a little bit more than you would when you're repotting something like a maple or a hornbeam. You can be a little bit more aggressive with scale junipers, but by more aggressive, I mean still maybe not as aggressive as you would be with a young deciduous tree. But definitely use caution when you're repotting, not to take off too much root. And then again, because you're repotting in April, early May, when things really start to pick up for the tree, the sap's really flowing, be very careful if you're going to hold the trunk. If you can avoid holding the trunk, that would be great. But sometimes if you have your hand tightly on the trunk, the live vein can separate from the tree, or the cambium can separate from the trunk, and it can really damage your tree. Wiring. So junipers can be wired pretty much any month of the year. If you're doing, detail wiring, if you're going to do large bends, wait until summer, like from now until winter, you could do more of a large bend. Because again, same as with the trunk issue, you can separate the cambium and kill the branch or the trunk that you're trying to bend. If you are doing big bends, be sure to use raffia. Soak that in water, wrap your tree. Lots of tutorials online for how to do this, but that will really help hold the tree together, provide some extra support and protection for the live vein there. Again, you could do them now. You can wait a little bit into the fall to do that, but and I tend to wait until this time of year to do a lot of juniper work, mostly because until this point, there's a big focus on deciduous, pruning everything back, getting the azaleas under control. About this time of year, things are slowing down. There's time to kind of sit down with your junipers, cut back where you need to cut back, and spend some time, some good quality time, wiring, doing all the detail wiring, wiring out all your tips, creating your foliage paths. If you are wiring, though, now during the growing season, be assertive about branch movement. If you're moving something that's not just a tip, try to just move it once, maybe twice, little adjustments. Again, you can separate the cambium or damage the tree. If if you're fiddling with the tip on any tree, you're going to run into a problem and possibly kill the tip. But if you're moving, more sizable branches, 1/4 of an inch branches, things and up, try to be assertive with your branch placement. Know what you're going to do. Copper for junipers. Aluminum generally, again, used for deciduous trees. Copper is great for junipers. It can stay on for a long time. Once you get it on, it hardens up and doesn't really move if you bump it. Try not to bump your tree anyway, but if you do, copper's got your back. Fertilizer. So fertilize regularly, whatever that means to you. If you have tea bags on your trees, go ahead and put tea bags on your junipers. If you're doing tea bags and liquid, do the same thing with your junipers. If you're just doing liquid, do that with your junipers. Generally, for a liquid fertilizer, you're going to use a single digit rather than a 20-20-20. If you're using 20-20-20, try to do half strength. But generally you'll go for a single digit number, something, that provides nutrients but doesn't make your tree go wild. A couple of nuances with fertilizer. Itoagawa in particular is a very strong type of juniper. Some of the mature Shohin Itoagawa aren't fertilized at all, or they're only fertilized very minimally. So if you have a small Itoagawa, just keep an eye on it. If your growth is kind of more than you want, if things are getting too big, too long, you can safely cut back and see if that helps. Developing trees, medium to large trees, again, you can fertilize them regularly unless you're seeing something out of the ordinary. Rocky Mountain juniper is one of our lovely natives, and they can also they're sometimes halfway between the needle and the scale juniper. They oftentimes have almost both of the foliage on them. Their mature foliage takes a long time to get, and then it's tricky to keep it kind of compact. They can be more needly if you over fertilize them. So if you're seeing this, if you're seeing really long shoots, if your shoots are not looking like scale juniper, if they're looking more needly, you can reduce your fertilizer with that as well. So a lot of it is, there's no correct way to fertilize these. Fertilize how you fertilize your trees, and if that is not working, if it's too much, then pull back a little bit. I would recommend, if you are pulling back fertilizer, still try to fertilize weekly, but maybe half strength, rather than cutting out fertilizers altogether. Or try, you know, a top dressing rather than a liquid. Ooh, grafting. Any questions about fertilizer or wiring before we jump into grafting?
No, I have a little note on it, is just to kind of go easy on the fertilizer in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
As we do with some of our black pine and these, if you want smaller needles or if you just want to slow the growth down, hold off in the spring a bit. You don't, you know, it's going to get its fertilizer from its stored energy, and kind of wait until you get warmer weather and then go ahead and fertilize. That'll keep your growth from taking off too fast, especially on your small plants.
On your small plants, yeah. If you're developing something that's fairly young, though, I might go ahead and fertilize when you start fertilizing your regular deciduous and all of that, because at that point you're not really looking to keep things tiny. You're just trying to grow it, so that would be okay. I've also seen some. If anybody's read this book, Bonsai Heresy, it's excellent. This is Michael Hagedorn's new book. There's a whole section on, yeah, Chris, it's great, isn't it? There's a whole section on fertilizing junipers and which if there's a difference between chemical and organic fertilizers and how it affects caliper growth and shoot growth. And it turns out that based on, you know, this not official scientific experiment, that organic fertilizers tend to increase growth enough, but chemical fertilizers give you longer shoots and a thicker caliper faster. So again, if you've got a mature tree, you can try your organic fish emulsion, something like that, and you'll have kind of more, you know, slower, steadier growth. It doesn't mean it's stopping its growth or that it's severely reduced. It's just less. If you're developing a tree and you use a chemical-based fertilizer, you're going to get longer shoots and thicker caliper faster. So that was an interesting experiment. All right.
You also mentioned, I was going to say, I learned about fish emulsion and that the raccoons will dig and flip trees over looking for the fish. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
that was in the book.
I haven't had that much of a problem with fish emulsion. I've had a big problem with organics in tea bags, like bone meal, blood meal, fish meal in tea bags. I put tea bags on everything in the collection, and I came back the next day and they were gone. So I haven't had as much trouble with the liquid fish emulsion. So I do use that pretty regularly. And at that point, I think the raccoons have enough other stuff at the gardens to go explore, but the tea bags were just too much for them. They couldn't help themselves. Oops. All right, so junipers are great for grafting, and there's some really interesting things you can do. Particularly, I'm thinking about how I've seen some Rocky Mountain junipers with Itoagawa foliage. So especially if you have a smallish Rocky Mountain juniper, as we talked about last slide, the foliage can be a little bit loose and a little bit needly. So if you have a really interesting trunk, interesting deadwood, and you want a really tight foliage pad, you can often graft kishu or shimpaku or itoagawa onto the Rocky Mountain stock and change your foliage over. Within 3 to 5 years, you'll have a relatively good tree. That may be a little fast, but it's pretty quick. So veneer grafting is one of the ways that you can graft a juniper. It's a little bit more tricky than approach grafting, which we'll talk about next. So basically what it is, the scion material, the material you're going to put onto your tree, and the bonsai where you're adding it are cut to the cambium. You match those 2 layers, and then they're held together tightly with grafting tape until the graft takes. And now, if you've never seen this, you're going to have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm going to jump us to this, to Jonas's website, Bonsai Tonight, because he has a really great post. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I thought we would just look at this together and kind of walk through what it looks like. So here is the juniper. Ta-da, cool tree. These, I believe from, oh yes, they are bags. That's what it is. It shows right on the package there. I had trouble figuring out what this was at first until I went through the entire post. Handy dandy grafting tape, grafting knife. You want a knife that is sharp for this. You can use a razor blade. You can buy a super expensive grafting knife from Japan. You can, use your pocket knife if it's sharp enough. Switchblade, whatever you've got lying around. Sphagnum moss, moistened. This is the stock material. You can see it has a lot of long extensions, and that's exactly what we're going to use, that new growth, because it's already wanting to grow, so we will make it grow somewhere else. So this is a close-up of that foliage. This will be trimmed back to this. This is the scion. This is the foliage that will be added to the juniper in the first picture. You want to cut the scion to a point. When I actually was doing some grafting, we skipped the step and just did the next thing, which is cutting a longer diagonal. Did we? No, we did do the small point. Never mind. Small point. It's been a little while. Then you want to do a longer cut into the cambium. You can see here, and here's your cambium. And this is the part you're going to match up to the tree. Take your knife and make a cut. Again, the angle, it's one of those things you kind of have to see in person and practice to get your angle right. You want it kind of long, about as long as you want your cut to be about as long as this part of the scion that's also been cut, and deep enough to expose the cambium. Because what you're going to do is put that scion into the cut you made on the tree, matching up those 2 pieces as closely as you can get. Oh, look, when you point at the cursor at the picture, it tells you what's happening. That's really cool. I didn't know it did that. Then you want to tightly secure that with grafting tape. Tightly. Ta-da. And so what Jonas did with this grafting, he used a small bag with moistened sphagnum and attached that securely around the scion to keep it alive. Another thing you can do with your scion is wrap everything green with grafting tape. So it's like this tight little, it looks almost like a little cigar or a little cigarette. You can just wrap that up, and that will prevent the scion from desiccating rather than putting it in a bag like this. He has made a mark with blue tape so he knows where it is. And that's your lovely grafted tree. Gorgeous. So, so ideally, that sphagnum moss will keep those scions alive and growing. This is something you will check on fairly regularly, and you will be able to know if the grafts took or not. The scion will either die and turn brown, or it will start to grow, at which point you can slowly take the bag off, reacclimate it to fresh air, but do not take off, you know, that grafting tape holding that scion there until you are certain that it has taken and the cambiums have matched and it's kind of calloused over. Okay, the other way to graft is approach grafting. This is a little bit more, I would say, safe, just because you're not risking, it's easier to keep this alive because it has its own root system rather than your scion, which has no root system, and you need to connect it to the tree that you're grafting or it will die. So you use a donor plant, a whip, a seedling, whatever. It's a year-old potted juniper. And that remains connected to its root system until the graft has taken. You can also use these for root grafting. If you need to add a root onto a tree, you can, and that's generally done more with deciduous, but you can do this to, you know, get yourself a new root in a new place. So what's happening here in the pictures is this is the part that you want the new growth on. So you're matching that up to the tree. On the inside of the donor plant, you will again make that kind of long, shallow cut to expose the cambium. You'll do the same thing on the bonsai that you are adding the foliage to. Try to connect those. You can wire it in place so that it doesn't move as much. And then again, with your grafting tape, wrap it up to keep that, that connection really tight until the cambiums have joined and have calloused, at which point you can just cut the whole thing off. The trick with this is that you have to get water also into the pot of the donor plant, otherwise your graft will not work because the donor plant will die. I've seen some pretty funny junipers that were repotted at strange angles, and it was complicated to get the pot at the right angle so that it would hold water when you watered it and still be at the right angle to put the foliage on. So it can be a challenge, but it's a really great way to get foliage that you want into a place where it's lacking, or completely changing over the foliage on a different species of tree. I've seen this done with pine as well. I'm trying to remember which ones. Black pine onto ponderosa, stuff like that, just to get, so that you can have kind of the best of both worlds, the really interesting trunk and deadwood with the tighter foliage. Pests and diseases, spider mites. I think everybody's pretty familiar with spider mites. Oh, do I have a question? Okay, I'm hearing things. If you've ever gotten a rosemary plant for Christmas and tried to grow it in your house over the winter, you likely saw it get super pale and webby. That was spider mites. Same thing can happen to your juniper. They'll get super pale. That's stippling from the mite, which sucks out the chlorophyll. It'll look kind of ghosty, and then you'll get some webbing. what you can do to control this is just spray your trees with water. But if you already live in a humid environment, that can spread other diseases, funguses, which we'll talk about next. So you can use a miticide or an oil spray. If you are using an oil spray, do not use it in the summer. It's not good for the tree. Stick to a pesticide, a miticide. But in the fall or the winter, early spring, you could use an oil spray. To tell if spider mites are what you have, if the visual cues are not enough, you can hold a white piece of paper under your branch, tap the branch, and then kind of smear your hand across the paper. And if you see some little streaks on the paper, that's probably the bug. So good test. The bigger problem with junipers are the fungal diseases. Phomopsis and cavatina, these are tip blights and they move very fast. If you know that your tree gets this regularly, if you know this is in your garden, if you bring in a new tree and you're not sure what it has, prophylactic spraying can be useful to prevent a problem from getting out of hand quickly. If you don't have a problem with it in your garden, it's a little bit safer to, kind of wait and see what happens. We have a little bit of this at the collection. It's been enough to kind of hit it when it shows up. Although prophylactic spraying is planned for the future, especially with, if you have a 800-year-old Rocky Mountain juniper, you don't want to get into the, a situation where phomopsis happens when you're on vacation and you come back and your tree's half gone. So prophylactic spraying can save a lot of heartache. There's a lot out there: Heritage, Phyton 35, Mancozeb, Cleary's are all really good for these. Daconil is the other one that is not, I didn't list on here. Daconil is good for this as well. So so for tip blights, you will see it clearly on the tips. Way back at the beginning of the presentation, we showed a picture of the yellow old growth falling off, just aging and desiccating and yellowing. The difference is, again, with the old foliage, that's more on the inside of the tree. Tip blight will be on the tips and it moves very quickly. So sanitize if you see this happen, sanitize your tools. A little bit of rubbing alcohol sprayed on them is good. And then do read the labels of all these pesticides. They'll often require, if they're not a systemic, they'll often require reapplication, usually 10 to 14 days after. So a lot of times with the prophylactic spraying, if you have this and you're in a humid area, you're just kind of doing this regularly in the spring. And if here in Michigan into the summer, if, we've got a lot of humidity here. Okay, questions, pests and diseases. Cool.
So I was told that another thing that you should do is avoid wetting the foliage when you water.
Yes.
To help prevent this.
Yes. Yep. And so that goes directly against what I said in the spider mite slide of, you can just spray off your tree. But if you do spray off your tree, you do run the risk of getting phomopsis and cavatina or spreading it, all over your tree much quicker. So again, the pesticide for the mites is probably a safer bet. And yes, when you are watering, try to avoid, and this is the same with most of your conifers, with your pines too, unless it's super hot, try to avoid the wetting the foliage, because the fungal diseases they can hit hard and hit fast and do a lot of damage.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we're going to end on just a note about display. Junipers are gorgeous trees, and there's so many different ways that you can display them. There's so many different styles. There's so many different shapes and sizes. They're a really versatile tree. They are a mountain tree. So one recommendation would be to consider using suiseki or viewing stone instead of an accent plant. If you do use an accent plant, consider the location of the tree. If you can get a little mountainside plant, that would be amazing. If you can't, just something, maybe some, in proportion to your tree. Again, because they are a mountain tree, you could use a scroll that has a moon, a hawk, a mountain in it. Unglazed pots for junipers, the general rule, browns, grays, they can take a little bit more of a red pot than a pine might. And here's just an example I found of a nice juniper display. They're fun to play with. All right, that's all I've got. I'm open for questions. Here's my email if you have questions tomorrow. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram under my own name and as Becoming Bonsai. So you can follow me there. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thank you very much, Carmen.
You're very welcome. If anybody has any questions, do let me know.
And you can also go later to the ABS Gmail, send us questions there too. I am on there daily, a couple of times a day, and can forward questions.
Carmen, is this going to be posted somewhere for review?
Yeah, I believe that we are recording it, so will it go up on the website or onto Facebook or both?
This goes to the cloud.
Goes to the cloud.
Yeah.
Is it then shared with everybody?
I don't know.